Hi, I'm Alicia Abendroth, and this is Tridge Agri-insider, your agri-food for thought podcast where we talk about anything and everything agri-food supply chain, brought to you by Tridge. While the word ecosystem seems to be wildly overused in the agri-food space today, Jehiel Oliver, CEO and founder of Hello Tractor, is putting a new spin on it. Jehiel and his team are creating an equipment ecosystem for African farmers, lowering the entry barrier to fancy farm equipment and giving child labor, or all menial labor for that matter, a run for its money. Well, thanks for coming to Agri-insider today, Jehiel. How are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you, Alicia?
Doing well, thank you. I
Good.
thought we'd get started at the very beginning, kind of your career, maybe even of your journey in agriculture. What got you into this industry?
Yeah, well, I started my career in finance. I was doing private equity and investment banking in the US and wanted to pivot my career into work that I found more meaningful. So I started doing deal structuring work in microfinance. That was my entry point into Africa and working in Asia and across the emerging markets. And what I observed is that most of the folks in these regions earn their income en masse on the farm. And so I started to explore how to bring finance to farmers in a more sustainable, scalable way commercially, which then led to mechanization and exploring the importance of just having access to basic equipment to close the yield gap, stabilize these rural economies. And from there, Hello Tractor was born.
Okay. No, that's super interesting. You don't hear a lot of people who go from a finance background and pivot into agriculture. I feel like it's
Yeah,
usually people try to get out of agriculture, right?
that's because it's a bad decision, Alicia. That's why you never hear it.
Yes, yep. It is a life. My dad calls it a lifestyle choice.
It's a
Agriculture.
lifestyle choice.
It's
You want to make a small fortune in agriculture, start with a large fortune.
Yes, yes, exactly. No, it's
Yeah.
so true. So I guess that's a great segue to kind of what drives your passion then. I mean, you kind of touched on it, bringing some of the
Yeah.
finance and technology to African markets, but I mean, maybe dig
Mhm.
deeper into what's driving that passion for you.
Well, you look at the role agriculture plays in Africa specifically. It's about 40% of the continent's GDP, 60% of the labor force is involved in agriculture and agro-allied industries. And I really wanted to see sustained economic growth on the continent. That's what drove me to move to Africa and do work on the continent. And I saw this as a commercially sustainable and scalable way to attack one of the most important industries on the continent. And I think even when you pan out from the region and look at the role agriculture plays globally, obviously we all need to eat. But if you look at where there's the most potential in our global food system, it's Africa. But the yield gap is also the widest on the continent. So closing that yield gap through introducing mechanization, digital tools, finance in a smart way, to me is also it's a global story and not just a regional food security story. That's really what inspired me to start the business. And I think it's the same mission that inspires everybody in the company to continue to push even through some of the hard, difficult times, which there are no shortage of. So
Yes, no, I can imagine. So I'm actually now pretty curious because you've mentioned twice, agriculture is a tough business and there's
yeah.
difficulties. And I can only imagine coming from this industry, myself. But can you maybe share a story? I mean, what's some of the struggles you faced in agriculture? I guess starting Hello Tractor.
Well, we can start from the very beginning. When I started the business, our first market was Nigeria. I knew I needed to be in market to be effective, so I moved there. And when I moved to Nigeria, Boko Haram had just kidnapped those girls. That was a big story in the international news. Ebola had just started. All right. So there's a massive pandemic in the region. And then the Nigerian economy slipped into a recession. The naira depreciated against the dollar by 250%. So there's a lot of issues that we had to grapple with at the macro level. And those issues created all sorts of headwinds for us as a business. And it was difficult at the time, but I think when we look back on that period, it also built an incredible amount of resilience in the team, patience, understanding that a lot of problems are just outside of your control, and some you have to just wait out. And I think that's helped us and really served us moving forward, even as we go into the good times. We always kind of temper our expectations around what's possible because you can't outgrow the market. So those are really valuable lessons, but that's just a small sampling of some of the challenges that we were confronted with. And it's kind of funny when the global pandemic happened, most folks on our team kind of shrugged it off. Like we're kind of used to these kind of shocks where everybody in the world was freaking out. Everybody on the team, on the Hello Tractor team was thinking, man, this is just like another Tuesday. What's the
Right.
big deal? So that was it. That was interesting.
That is awesome. And I think, I mean, I spent a little bit of time in Africa, and I think sometimes that resiliency that you see in the people there, it's so beautiful. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's interesting to hear you say that in the context of Hello Tractor. So you moved the business from Nigeria to Kenya then? Is that like, so you made this full transition, you switched the headquarters?
We opened a second office. Effectively, I guess the when I moved to Kenya, that created a new center of gravity. So we started to hire other senior leaders to join the team, and they just kind of naturally moved to Nairobi. We never officially changed the headquarters, but
Oh, okay.
we're too we're too small to even talk like that. We got an office in Nigeria, we got an office in Kenya.
Well, okay. But nonetheless, I guess my question where I was kind of going with this is, wh- I think a lot of people are interested in getting involved in the African continent. I think what you talked about at the
Mhm.
beginning of the podcast, there's a lot of untapped potential in Africa.
For sure.
From your business experience, and I'd love to hear a bit more also about your background coming and growing up in the States and kind of moving to Africa. But from your kind of perspective, what are some of the benefits of being in Kenya, I guess, and how has that, what are some differences you see even between these two countries or countries holistically in
Mhm.
Africa? Because both are quite agrarian states, but maybe they're in different
Yep.
development phases. Maybe there's a reason, right, that Kenya kind of drew you in.
Yeah, it's pros and cons to both, right? Nigeria is a massive market. It's the biggest economy on the continent by a factor of two, right?
Right.
By a multiple of two. Um, Biggest population on the continent, tremendous upside. It has challenges, much more volatile currency, much less consistency in the agricultural policy and the policy environment. There security challenges. I think they get overstated, but there are security challenges in the country. But then you go over to Kenya, much smaller market, smaller population, smaller economy, but more stable, friendlier business environment. Ease of doing business is much more um, attractive to tech companies and outsiders coming in. And so again, like it's just pros and cons, right? And so what benefited us in Nigeria was very attractive market and a lot of space to innovate with some very, very impressive entrepreneurs who could take an innovative business model and really kickstart that go-to-market motion for us, learn a ton because the adoption of these new practices was happened so quickly, and we got saturation in Nigeria fairly quickly as a result of that, which then gave us a launch pad to go into Kenya. Right when we got to Kenya, there was a friendlier business environment, but what we brought with us was discipline, was a bit more patience that you don't often see with startups, but it's at least my belief that patience is mission critical when you're talking about building a company in agriculture, because the adoption cycles are much slower. Your go to market is going to be extended a bit. But taking that into Kenya, we were able to do all sorts of interesting things, introduce new products and new features to the technology, engage new partners who may be more comfortable working in Kenya versus higher risk markets. And that accelerated the business further, but it was built on the foundation that we created in Nigeria.
So a little bit about Hello Tractor. So tell us about Hello Tractor. Why Hello Tractor? Why now?
Yeah, I mean, farmers across smallholder production systems largely lack access to mechanization, lack access to tractors, combines, all the equipment that they need to plant on time and cultivate the land they have access to. And we saw technology as a bridge to bring those innovations that farmers across commercial agricultural systems enjoy. And so we saw an opportunity to introduce technology on both sides of this marketplace. You have farmers on one side, you have farm equipment owners on the other. We first introduced, we were first to market with a fleet management solution for smaller horsepower tractors. This is the category of equipment that is used across the emerging markets. We connected those machines to the cloud, gave the equipment owner security and visibility on that machine through our apps, so they can monitor where their equipment is going, how much work it completed, fuel consumption, fuel theft, and then a booking application where they could connect with farmers in need of tractor services who are being booked through a separate Hello Tractor application being used by what we call booking agents, people who live in agricultural communities. They have 200 or 300 farmers in their network. Say, hey, instead of farming manually, I can get you access to a tractor. I go out, I book those farmers' fields, and that booking is then transmitted to the farm equipment owner that's available, that's closest by, that has capacity to service the demand, and that's facilitated through the technology. And it's cool to see that unlock a value on both sides. Farmers can plant on time, maximize their yield. We just did some customer surveys where you see triple digit income improvement from accessing tractor services through Hello Tractor. That's amazing income growth, right? I'm talking about like cash in pocket, right? And these are 55% of our customers receive services for the first time in their life through Hello Tractor. So it's opening up an entirely new class of farmers accessing tractor and mechanization technology. And then on the tractor owner side, you get to earn more money with your equipment while doing good in the world. And who doesn't want to do that? So it's a good win-win.
So if I'm getting this right, the alternative for your client base would be doing this by hand or by horse or or just the local tractor that's run down, or what is the alternative if they don't have access to this ecosystem of farm equipment?
Yeah. To be honest, Alicia, our biggest competitor is household labor, which is unfortunately often children, right? And pulling your kids out of school, because you can't send your kid to school on an empty stomach. So you first got to get your farm operation set, and then do things like educate your children. So we're helping to disrupt that massive problem, right? The second is migrant labor. But as we know globally, and this is especially acute in Africa, um, aging farm populations, rapid urbanization, there's been a broad-based depletion of labor in these rural communities. So the labor just isn't available. And often, tractors supplement that loss of labor. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened commercially at scale in Africa, and that's the problem that we're solving for.
That's extremely interesting. Your biggest competitor is child labor. That might be going a bit far, but household labor. I like that word.
Yeah.
And I think you just kind of dawned on, I thought of a point while you were speaking, which is,
Mhm.
it wasn't too long ago that a lot of these developed nations or Western societies were also still bound to the land. And I talk about this quite a bit,
Mhm.
everyone that kind of sits in a desk job or, I don't know, is doing science or research or anything really that is in agriculture is made possible by modern agriculture, right? It's freed us from the
Yeah.
land, equipment, chemicals, the kind of industrial revolution or green revolution is what has
Yep.
enabled us to kind of develop our, education, our
Yeah.
academics, our, who we are kind of in the world as a species. And I think it kind of gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because it seems like you're helping with that evolution in
Yeah.
Africa, helping these
Yeah.
kids that maybe instead would have to be working at home get an education, right?
Mhm. About 80% of the child labor, right? And Africa is a big contributor to, unfortunately, to child labor. About 80% of it is because of agriculture, right? And so it's not just technology that makes life easier for, farmers, and puts more money into the pockets of farmers. That's important. And that's ultimately why we started the business. I think what we didn't understand is all the ripple effects from having manual forms of farming as the dominant practice, right? Child labor, drudgery, the alternative income that could be earned, even from an adult farmer, right? Who can no longer go out and go into the city or go into the community and do more, higher productive work, in processing, all sorts of things that people can do with their time outside of back breaking work out in the sun. And we're solving for that. And it's special to be able to create that kind of value. And I think the entire team feeds off that. I think it's a huge motivator for all of us.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Like I said, it gives me goosebumps. So from a technical perspective, would you kind of compare this to like the Uber of agriculture? I mean, Uber is very, fast paced, and you can get an Uber within 10 minutes these days, right? But maybe
Yeah,
on a slower, more agricultural related scale, is it kind of set up like an Uber?
it is. I mean, you can think it's collaborative consumption, right? You have a one to many relationship between the asset owner and the customers that they service. I think there's also a lot of nuance there. Uber, when they sell cars or when they sell their technology into the market, the cars already existed. In many instances, we're the market maker for our asset class, right? We're introducing tractors. So that comes with complexity. Um, for Uber, when they're connecting drivers and riders and a car breaks down, there's already infrastructure to fix cars. That's another problem we have to solve for, right? There's licensed drivers in the Uber ecosystem that already existed, whereas for us, we actually had to create an operator training program,
Wow.
um, and a technician training program. So we have like this vocational school hat. That's also meaningful jobs, dignified work for our community, but it's just more work, right? So, yeah, I think it's true that we are like a Uber type platform for the agriculture space, but there's a lot more that we have to do just to get to, level one, right?
Right.
In that double-sided market. And we're not complaining because I think those are all value points that strengthen our business, but it means it takes longer to reach that exit velocity.
Right. So what you're describing is not only providing the platform where the tractor can find the farmer, but actually also the road it drives on, the license to
Yeah,
drive the tractor, the
yeah,
OSHA food. And I think those are the things, right, that, coming from the States myself as well, we take so for granted, right? There's all these support systems that help
yeah,
these functions
yeah,
proceed and become successful, right? I mean, the amount
exactly.
of food safety trainings, and also just, like pesticide applicator trainings, and just all these support systems that are government mandated. I don't know. Do they just not exist yet in Africa? Does it require that level of pioneering, or can you collaborate there? I guess I'm curious how
Yeah,
developed is it in that sense?
it's a lot of collaboration. At least you hit it right on the head. It's a lot of collaboration. I just got off of a really exciting phone call with one of our biggest collaborators and our biggest investor, John Deere. They've been a huge supporter of our work and helping us build out all these adjacencies to our core tech primitive, which is our fleet management and our marketplace to connect the tractor owners to the farmers. Um, they're a valuable partner in building out all those adjacencies. We also work closely with other large corporates from seed, fertilizer, crop care, soil testing to bring those capabilities into our market. And the benefit of being a digital platform and truly digitizing that last mile is that those data points create a de-risking factor for many of our corporate partners who would otherwise look at these markets and be very skeptical about how to engage and maybe just unclear on how to engage and where to engage, right? But digital and data help to large players understand where there is value for their product. And through the clustering of the demand, you have to cluster farmers into groups in order to make tractors profitable. That same economies of scale is relevant for seed distribution, fertilizer distribution, trading, post harvest. And so you can kind of help create a foundation for that ecosystem to now build on top of. And we value our partners who are walking that journey with us.
Partnerships are, I think, key, especially in the startup space.
Yeah.
Which brings me to my next question. You've, and I'd love to get into this now in a little more detail. You grew up in the States. I looked you up. I've done some research. You worked on Capitol Hill. You've got something going on with the World Economic Forum. You just mentioned John Deere as an investor. How has it been for you being what I call an ag tech startup, African-based ag tech startup, and kind of
Yeah.
pulling in these relationships? Are there any anecdotes you can share specifically to kind of bridging, I guess, the Western world or the United States with Africa? Is there anything insightful there?
Um, I think a bridge is a good analogy in bringing new relationships, new sources of capital, new insights into a market that is full of opportunity. Our biggest resource in this market is talent, but what's going to unlock that talent? Capital, put in the right places, and connections with other innovators, large and small. And so that's a big part of my role as CEO of Hello Tractor. I also like to think of it as a hub and spoke, right? Where Hello Tractor kind of sits in the center of this ecosystem, and we have all these really important spokes across academia and research, policy, private sector, large corporate, private sector, startups, and even SME level. Um, Finance, right? We got a financial product that we launched last year where we finance tractors into the market and injecting liquidity into traditionally unbanked communities of entrepreneurs who are full of potential but lacked opportunity. So we have, a spoke in the financial community. And I think bringing all these pieces together is the only way that wheel spins and that virtuous cycle continues. But it's almost like a snowball effect because, as it spins, it creates more and more momentum and it gets bigger and bigger. And eventually, hopefully, we'll solve the problem completely. I do think we're on the right path, but I still think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, and I think it's interesting that you're bringing your finance background in. So maybe just shedding some more spotlight on that, because I'm sure I have listeners
Yeah.
who, maybe come from finance, right, and are exploring this agri sector because at the moment, I don't know if you've read some of these statistics, but the VC space as a whole has gone down, their investments and their kind of
Yeah,
access to cash. But the
yeah,
sustainability and kind of agri space has actually stayed pretty solid in that downturn. So
yeah.
yeah, I guess what for you having seen both sides of that coin, right? The finance world and now African agriculture, is there any insights or anecdotes or I guess any skill sets that you're leveraging from this previous chapter of your career today, or any kind of tips of advice you could give people wanting to bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, definitely that's when my skill set became most relevant was when we started financing tractors and fund structuring and, setting up an off-balance sheet vehicle to finance a traditionally unbanked population of entrepreneurs took uh, a big push from an entire team of folks, but I was at least relevant in my because up until that point, I was always the dumbest person in the room, and then once we started financing tractors, I was like in the middle.
Right.
I've never been the smartest person in the room at a Hello Tractor meeting, but at least sitting somewhere in the middle where I could at least have one or two things of relevance to say. And it's an interesting product. Like, what do we do with the pay-as-you-go tractor finance product? We have, as I mentioned earlier, these agents in the community booking networks of farmers through our Hello Tractor application. They're paid a commission for that, right? But now through pay as you go, these entrepreneurs can graduate to become tractor owners, right? Once they reach a critical mass of booked acres, we can assess that, underwrite it. We have developed our own risk scoring framework using data coming out of our application and qualify people based on a book of business that they have. We don't need their bank statements because they don't have a bank relationship. We don't need a credit score because they don't have that either, right? But we can look at their success in booking farmers, and then the serviceability of that demand, and reward them with an opportunity to own a $30,000, $40,000 piece of equipment
Wow.
that is quite literally a life changing asset for them and their entire household. It can change the entire trajectory of a family. That machine can take you from earning a few $100s a month to thousands of dollars a month, right? And
Wow.
if you continue to have success, you can get a second one and a third one, right? And there's no upper limit. I just think that's a beautiful way to align commercial finance with really deeply impactful work. And the way we understand that credit risk pulls from and the way we structure not only the credits, but even at the fund and portfolio level, it incorporates the best of finance so you can remain intellectually stimulated
Right.
while doing highly impactful work. I just left a meeting with an investor, and we were talking about running Monte Carlo simulations in the portfolio to accommodate for climate risk, right? That's work that we do internally. We don't outsource that, right? We have hedging. We borrow in dollars and hard currency. We lend in local currency. We don't want
Wow.
to expose our customers to FX, to foreign exchange risk, right? So we do Black Scholes modeling to price the risk in our portfolio. And you see, this is my world. Now I'm getting excited, but we're utilizing these best practices to extend the amount of capital going into wildly undercapitalized markets with tremendous potential for the region, but also for the world. And that's exciting, right? It's intellectually exciting and it's very meaningful, right? So you wake up excited doing that work.
So now I'm also very curious to understand when you came to agriculture after leaving finance,
Mhm.
they're totally different worlds. And I can speak a little bit
Very different.
from experience, having a lot of friends in the finance sector and just these are very different worlds, and I think it's amazing that you're bridging them, because what you find a lot also in agriculture is that people don't know how to approach the finance world or the banking world, right? It's a very common
Yeah,
problem in a sense, and that's a whole nother topic, is that financial sustainability in agriculture, which I'd love to
yeah.
pick your brain about. But what shocked you when
Yeah.
you left finance and came to agriculture? I mean, you said you were the stupidest guy in the room at times, which I really appreciate because agriculture is complicated, right? And it's
It
not
is.
straightforward. So I guess what shocked you when you started in ag?
Well, the complexity for sure, the importance of system thinking with agriculture, right? The food system is globally integrated. Prices are transmitted from Brazil, Black Sea port, Russia, Ukraine, obviously U.S. Midwest and the Canadian prairies. Like these price signals affect the most rural farmer sitting in the middle of nowhere in uh, the middle belt of Nigeria or Western Kenya, right? Or the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, right? And that interconnectedness forces you to understand everything from geopolitics to trends in the global food system. And then when you get down to the in country stuff and even in field stuff, the system that exists on a farmer's field, right? Below the soil and the surface soil, from organic matter to managing organic matter in the soils through best practices, the water and controlling your water tables and water resource management. I mean, once you start digging into this stuff, you start to understand and appreciate the complexity of the system. And there's just an infinite reservoir of learnings there. And the folks that know the most are some of the most humble, some of the most hard to find people, because that's also the culture of agriculture and the culture of farming. And that's true in the Midwest, where I'm from, right? As true in Africa, right? Where we focus a lot of our work. And that's just kind of a humbling kind of thing to be around so many really smart people that's farming for generations who know so much. And when you talk to them, it's just kind of matter of fact about everything. That makes it kind of a easier industry to enter into. When I entered into finance, I didn't know anything then, and it was very difficult to get up that learning curve because people use their insights and their knowledge as a weapon against you versus an opportunity to collaborate and educate and get you up to speed on something. And I think there's some comfort in agriculture as a result of that, as a new entrant into agriculture.
That's really interesting because I've also heard people say agriculture can be quite closed off at times as well. It might just be geographic or regional, right? Depending on where you are, there's different communities. But I love that you said that there's this interconnectivity in agriculture. And I think it is so
Mm-hmm.
true. I mean, you could take a fruit farmer in South Africa and they'd find a million things to relate to with a fruit farmer in, I don't know, Germany, right? You could take,
Mm-hmm.
an African wheat supplier and they'd be somehow still connected to the, I don't know, massive largest producer in Brazil, right? Like there is this connectivity on a human level, but then there's also this connectivity in just interdependency on the supply chain, right? What you were saying, this
Yeah.
geopolitics, climate. And I think that's the really beautiful thing in my perspective about agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
You're they say you're a jack of all trades for a reason, right? You have to deal with the weather. You have to deal with, like you said, soil science, plant science. You have to deal with business,
Yeah.
accounting, compliance, international trade, sales. I mean, you're affected by all of these different trades. And I think there's definitely
Yeah.
fluidity in the industry that deserves a spotlight.
Absolutely. And I think it's beautiful. Like it's fascinating. As you said, the more you get to understand, the more you can appreciate and respect it. I do think the what can be interpreted as farmers being closed off, I think is risk management that oftentimes, especially in tech, we don't fully appreciate. We don't appreciate customers who aren't willing to fail fast, because if a farmer fails fast, they might lose the farm versus just deleting your app and then life goes on. No, like farmers are amazing risk managers, and that means it's going to take them a bit longer to adopt your technology and all this fancy stuff you've been working on that may or may not work, if we're being honest, right? And so
Right.
we also have to respect that, right? Like I got 60 chances as a farmer. Am I going to waste one of those chances on you or risk one of those chances on you, right? And potentially ruin an entire season and maybe lose my farm? That's a big, a whole lot of faith to put in somebody. And as an innovator in agriculture, you have to be respectful of that and be mindful of their downside risk,
Yeah.
right? Which is significantly higher than anything that could ever happen to your business. If Hello Tractor goes out of business tomorrow, most people here are adaptable enough; they will be okay. If
Right.
we lose if we lose a farmer because we ruined their entire season and potentially their entire livelihood, right? It's going to be hard to bounce back from that. And so we have to approach the market that way. So and be respectful of the fact that it's going to take a little longer for that person to agree to work with you. That's okay.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I think it is something that some founders in this space completely overlook, is that exactly what you said, the amount of risk that farmers are mitigating and having to constantly calculate. In fact, I was speaking with a wonderful woman. Also, she has a startup yesterday, and she said something that really stuck with me. There's disproportionate risk on suppliers in the supply chain. And I think you're really
Mm-hmm.
playing into that, right? If we want to gather this market share in agriculture, you have to go in aware that they already carry a huge amount of risk on their shoulders, and they're running off of really small profit margins.
Yeah.
So no, you're totally spot on with that. So what trends, maybe kind of on a more big picture scope, what trends have you excited in agriculture? Is there anything positive from where you sit in the world that you're seeing that gets you kind of excited?
Yeah, I think definitely a shift towards more climate smart forms of agriculture. I think farmers are acutely aware of, especially in our region, how they're being disproportionately affected by climate change and their willingness to adopt new technologies like no-till farming, minimal till, ripping the soil, breaking the hard pan. These are all things that I think will pay off massive dividends for the farmers, for our climate, and even carbon sequestration. And it's good to see those decisions trending in that direction. And we just want to make sure we're there to make sure the equipment is available for them to adopt those practices. So, what we've done as a company is in our finance program, create underwriting incentives for people who are adopting these climate smart technologies for regenerative agriculture. They get a reduction in their down payment requirement. In some instances, they have zero down payment to own that equipment. Now they still get tracked closely. They still have to perform against their plan, and we do hold them accountable to that. We track it very closely through the technology. We want all our customers to be successful, both the tractor owners, but also the farmers who expect that tractor to show up in their field. But it's nice to see that trend towards regenerative agriculture. And that's accelerating at such a high rate across our entire ecosystem, right on down to the farmer's decision to adopt that technology in their field. The second trend is women's involvement in mechanization. One of the other things that we underwrite towards is creating more of a gender balance in who gets to own tractors. Similarly, reducing our down payment requirements. And so we've been able to create a third of our borrowers are women now. So a third of our tractor owners under the Pay As You Go Tractor Finance program. And that's also exciting to see because the truth is most of the women on the continent, women are the drivers of agriculture, but they don't have access to the assets. And that's weird, right? Because like they are actually standing at the vanguard. And so being able to get equipment out so they can extract the most value for their effort is also pretty special to see. And that's a trend that we hope will continue to move in that direction. So a
Yeah,
lot to
no,
be excited about. Yeah.
I like the women in agriculture part, and I think mechanization is a big part of that too. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and had I been out there tilling with my hands, I probably would have said, nope, this is a man's job. Like, there's no way I'm going to sit there and get these blisters and.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because there was tractors. I actually was out there right alongside everyone else, sitting there
Yeah.
spraying, doing the work, right? And I think that's really relatable to me, because mechanization does allow for a lot more diverse grouping of individuals to work
Yeah.
in this sector, right? And yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's where we're kind of headed as a species, right? Is more
Yeah.
and more inclusivity in a lot of industries. No,
Hmm.
that's super cool. So if we can, leaving all of the geopolitics and even Hello Tractor a bit aside, let's dig in a little deeper into where you grew up in the States. Kind of what was your career trajectory? I mean, I still want to know about the World Economic Forum before we conclude, how that fits into this picture, and how you kind of got there. But maybe let's just start with, where were you born? I mean, what was your kind of
Yeah.
background?
Yeah. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So from the Midwest, but from an urban, for those not from the States, the east side of Cleveland is a city traditionally based on the manufacturing economy. When that got offshore to Mexico and China, that city got hit pretty hard. And so it's a upbringing that I appreciate deeply. I value some of those relationships that I built from my upbringing more than even throughout my career and the interesting places my career has taken me. And what I learned during that time period, I think, is something that's lived with me. Um, but it's your typical kind of urban U.S. urban city, lower income, high unemployment, but rich on grit, tenacity, character matters a lot where I grew up, and I hope that I bring those qualities into business. I hope whether we succeed or fail, if we do it the right way, I'll be proud of myself, and I think the folks I grew up with in my community will be proud of me. But yeah, so when I left to go to college, I had an interest in finance because I saw that as a real gap in low income communities globally typically don't have access to high finance, at least, and bringing large pools of capital that can make real structural changes. And that's what got me initially interested in investment banking. I had a phenomenal mentor throughout college and beyond who kind of educated me on finance and the power of finance. And he took an interest in me, put me under his wing, a guy named Larry Talley, and that positioned me for that career. I got a lot of arrows in my quiver while working in that career, and then I now translated into entrepreneurship, right? And first in still in finance and deal structuring, but then ultimately in Hello Tractor. And Hello Tractor, because it was so crazy of an idea, right? It gave us a lot of attention, which gave me access to things like, serving in the Obama administration or the World Economic Forum stuff that you mentioned and the circular economy cohort. And that's all cool stuff, right? Like those, but I think they're cool because they created more visibility to an important problem, right? Like, is it cool? Is it a cool bullet point on the resume? Yeah. But more important than that, it's created all sorts of acceleration in the work that we could have never anticipated. And I'm deeply appreciative to these organizations, to White House, to World Economic Forum, to all the big and small. Like, honestly, I weight them all the same, completely honestly. And because they positioned us to be in a place where we can at least see a line of sight on how we can solve these massive, deeply entrenched problems, right? And you can't go at it alone. And we've been fortunate to have some of the most amazing collaborators, dedicated partners who see a vision for the world and the future as we see it, and they're willing to do the work to accomplish that vision.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you didn't just kind of, it's not just a great look on the CV, but it's actually something that drove impact for the problem you're trying to solve. And you said something really interesting as well. Poverty is a global problem. It exists in the
Mhm.
States. It even exists
Hmm.
in Europe, right? Like it's all over the planet. And how do we shed some more spotlight on these communities and integrate them into these global spaces or globalization, right? Because there is this huge trend happening of the world getting more global, and there's certain communities that are absolutely being left behind in that. So yeah, I really like that you used, you know, your time on, and it's incredible, right? You were on Capitol Hill. I take it you were actually working then in the White House at times. I mean, that was your world for a stint, or was it not that
I
hands on?
was No, I was an advisor in the President's Advisory Council for
Okay.
Business in Africa. That was under Commerce. So and that was a council of business leaders, both innovators like Hello Tractor, but then also mostly large corporates, advising the president on how to engage with the continent to not only serve U.S. business and political interests, but also where is that nexus between U.S. interests and also developing the continent in a more sustained way, rebuilding that soft power. um, and so that was a special moment because we brought a new voice into those discussions as innovators with boots on the ground. And being, I was the chair of the technology subcommittee on that. So it was interesting to be able to talk about things as we saw it from our vantage point, kind of at the very bottom of the totem pole. But then it was also fascinating to be able to engage with business leaders at some of the most successful large corporations on earth and learning from them, right? Like they have a wealth of knowledge, right? Like, and everybody has a role to play, right? And I don't weight anybody more heavily, but I'm open to learning from anyone. And there was just a wealth of knowledge on that council. And we collaborated ultimately with a number of those businesses. IBM was on the council. We started some work with them, particularly on some of the AI work that we were bringing in to our business back in 2018. AGCO was on the council as well. John Deere is now on the council. So you see all these relevant businesses doing the work and really helping to even shape U.S. policy in Africa, doing it in a way where there's mutual benefit. I think that's really special.
That is so cool. So because there's a lot of listeners we're trying to target as well, or who are in their maybe early stages of their career, who are trying to kind of
Hmm.
get into maybe even following a similar path that you took, right? Driving impact and
Yeah.
bridging some of these gaps that you've successfully bridged. How
Hmm.
did you get into a program like this? I mean, what were some right moves maybe you made to get these opportunities?
I really wish there was a formula. I was very lucky to host a panel when Obama visited Kenya in 2016, I believe. It was the first US president visiting the continent in a number of years. And I hosted a panel with President Obama and President Kenyatta, who was the president of Kenya at the time. And that put me on the radar with the White House. So when a seat opened up on this advisory council, I was invited to join, which I happily accepted. But I wish there was a formula for it. It was like pure luck. Even I wasn't even going to attend the conference where I was being invited to host these two sitting presidents because I didn't know, they didn't tell me at the time that that's who my panelists would be. So I was like, I'm not interested. Like, I'm busy. I'm trying to build Hello Tractor. I can't leave Nigeria to fly to Kenya to do all this conference stuff. Folks love conferences, especially in this part of the world for some reason. And so I was like, no. And I had a friend who worked at State Department, and she called me up. She said, Jehiel, like, I can't give you details on why everybody's pushing you to come to this conference, but you really need to come. Just trust me. So just having good friends who are, looking out for me and mixed in with some luck and being prepared, I suppose, to some degree, is what led to this opportunity, which then unlocked a number of other opportunities for me, and most importantly for the company and the communities that we service.
So you've met Obama, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I met him a few times. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, casually a
He's a
few
good guy.
times.
He's a no, I mean, I don't mean it to sound that way because it is important. It is important for me personally, right? Like very important. Like that is a special moment, right? But within the scope and context of the business, it was a huge unlock for us too as a business. And while I was, you can take a brief pause and reflect on how important it is as an African American male to meet the first Black president. That's a special moment, yes. Um, and I don't want to minimize that or be fake
It's
humble because
special.
it's special, right? But I think what we can possibly do with the company because of that opportunity and so many other serendipitous moments in our history, I actually believe that that's going to be even more special, right? Where we are today versus where we started, that delta, that's special. And where we intend to go over the next few years, it's inspiring, and it's hard to even sometimes take inventory of these special moments because you're so focused on this hairy ambitious goal. And as we move towards it, maybe I can get more comfortable with taking stock of these moments. My wife always tells me I need to live in the moment and appreciate the things that are happening more. I struggle with that a bit, but yes, Alicia, yes, that was a special moment. Yes.
I very much relate, and I think we're all very excited to see what you do next, Jehiel. I mean, the track record's there. Don't want to raise the bar too high, but we're excited to see what you're going to do with Hello Tractor.
Thanks. Yeah, we got a good team, dedicated folks, wicked smart from Africa, working on Africa. And I'm also excited to see where we can take this.
So, very last question. Any words of wisdom you'd like to give the audience? Anything, maybe even looking at some of our younger audience, or is there any last parting words of wisdom?
Patience. Patience. Time can be your friend or your enemy, and it's all based on expectations around when things should happen. And I think with effort and commitment, anything is possible, but you can't pick the timeline when you'll have that breakout moment. So patience is the key ingredient, and perseverance. We live in a moment in time where there's a premium on instant gratification. But if you can set all that aside and discipline yourself to just be patient, I think it's amazing what is possible. There's absolutely no ceiling. And I think that's true for the work that we do. And I think that's true for everybody listening to this podcast.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much, Jehiel. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate it.
This podcast has been brought to you by Tridge, the leading global intelligence and networking platform for agriculture. Visit us at www.tridge.com to find out more.